The night Ellen Bryce's life burned to ash, the flames screamed louder than the blizzard tearing through Riverbend Creek, a roar that drowned out the stars and shook the frozen earth. She stood in the snow, Finn Carver's knife clutched so tightly her knuckles bled, her breath ragged as she watched her cabin, her home, her sanctuary, every scrap of her hard-earned life, collapse into a pyre of cinders and sorrow. The men who set the fire, shadows bound to her late husband's enemies, melted into the storm, their laughter a blade twisting in her chest, sharp and cruel. Finn had crossed a gang years ago, a deal gone sour over a secret he'd guarded with his life, and their vengeance had waited, patient and merciless, until this moment. 6 months a widow, Ellen had survived by cooking for the town's families, hauling heavy pots of stew and fresh-baked bread through icy trails to scrape together a living. Her hands blistered but her spirit unbroken. Now, her home was gone, her coins buried in the wreckage, and the townsfolk, gripped by fear of the gang's long shadow, turned their backs on a woman marked by blood and fire. The wind clawed at her face, stinging her eyes, freezing the tears she refused to shed as she stumbled through knee-deep snow to the church, the only shelter left. Her hands trembled, not just from the cold biting through her thin coat, but from the weight of having nothing. No roof, no hope, no way forward. Finn had died in a blizzard, chasing a debt to save their home, his last words a faint plea. Keep the fire lit, Ellen. She'd fought to honor that, cooking until her bones ached, but the world seemed determined to snuff her out, to leave her as nothing but ash. A knock shattered the silence, sharp and impossible in the storm's fury, echoing through the church's empty pews. Miss Bryce, a voice called, deep and steady, cutting through the howling wind like a blade through cloth, its calm a stark contrast to the chaos outside. She gripped the knife, her breath catching in her throat, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped animal. Who's there? Hank Sutter, South Ridge. Hank, the cattle rancher, a war veteran whose name carried whispers of danger and quiet respect, a man who walked through Riverbend like he owned its secrets. He'd been in town last month, settling a feud over rustled cattle, his eyes hard as flint, his words clipped and rare, his presence enough to silence a room, to make men look away. What do you want? Work, he said, his voice calm but unyielding, a rock against the storm. Cook for my men. Roof, wages, fair trade. He stood in the church doorway, snow dusting his broad shoulders, a heavy sack in his arms, bread, jerky, a small jar of honey, a blanket folded tight, a tin of coffee, and a pair of wool socks, their stitching rough but warm. Heard about your cabin. Not here to pity you. It's a deal. Ellen's pride surged, a fierce ember in her chest, burning against the idea of charity, of owing anyone anything, of being seen as weak. But the cold seeping into her bones, the hunger gnawing her stomach, and the memory of flames devouring her life were louder, their weight crushing her resolve. She nodded, tucking the knife into her coat, its weight a cold comfort, a reminder of the woman she'd been and the one she'd have to become. She followed him to his wagon, the storm swallowing the world behind them, the snow a white veil that hid the future. As they rode, a shadow flickered in the trees, a figure watching, too quick to catch, too close to dismiss as the wind's trick, its presence a chill that lingered in her bones. Her hand tightened on the knife, but Hank's eyes stayed forward, his jaw set, his silence heavy, as if he'd seen it too and chose to say nothing. The Sutter Ranch sprawled across the valley, its bunkhouse glowing with lamplight against the endless dark, a beacon in the frozen wilderness that promised warmth but not safety. Hank led her to a small room off the kitchen, clean, with a narrow bed, a wood stove, and a window framing snow-laden pines that swayed like ghosts in the storm, their branches scratching the glass. Yours, he said, his voice low but firm, leaving no room for argument, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before he turned away. Cook tonight. Men are hungry. She nodded, her hands moving on instinct as she lit the stove, the familiar act grounding her, a tether to the life she'd lost. She started a stew, beef, carrots, sage, thickened with flour she found in a tin, the scent rising like a prayer, filling the bunkhouse with warmth. The ranch hands, men with weathered faces, scars mapping their lives, ate in near silence, their nods of approval louder than words, their eyes softening as they scraped their bowls clean. "Best meal in years, Miss Ellen," one said, his voice rough but warm, his eyes crinkling with a rare smile that made her chest ache with something like hope. Hank stood by the door, watching, his presence heavy, not threatening but unyielding, like a mountain against the wind. She caught his eye once, and he held her gaze a moment too long. Something flickering in his face, something softer than his usual stone, something that made her breath catch, that stirred a warmth she wasn't ready to name. He turned away, his boots heavy on the floor, but the moment lingered, a spark in the dark. Ellen cooked daily, her hands finding rhythm in the chaos of the kitchen, chopping onions until tears blurred her vision, kneading dough until her arms ached, roasting meat over an open flame until the bunkhouse smelled of home, a home she'd thought she'd lost forever. She made chili that burned the tongue, biscuits light as clouds, apple pies with fruit she'd bartered for in town, their sweetness cutting through the bitterness of winter, their crusts golden and crisp. The hands paid in coins, some leaving small tokens, a carved wooden spoon, a polished river stone, a braided leather cord. By the kitchen door, gestures that softened the edges of her grief, that reminded her she was more than a widow, more than a victim. Hank was always there, hauling firewood, mending the barn, his silence a steady pulse in the ranch's daily rhythm, his presence a comfort and a question. At night, she sat by the kitchen fire, Finn's knife on the table, its blade catching the light like a warning, a promise, a piece of the man she'd loved. She'd trace its edge, remembering his laugh, his quiet strength, the way he'd promised they'd build a life here, a promise broken by the snow and the men who hunted him. Hank left her supplies, coffee, flour, a slab of bacon, without a word, never asking for gratitude, his offerings as quiet as his footsteps. Once, she found a sprig of sage tucked into a sack of potatoes, its scent sharp and wild, and wondered if it was his way of speaking without words, of saying something he couldn't voice. Another night, she woke to a strange sound, boots crunching outside her window, too deliberate to be the wind, too close to be chance. By morning, a single hoof print was pressed into the snow, leading nowhere, a silent threat that made her grip the knife tighter, her eyes scanning the dark for answers. The town's whispers grew vicious, spreading like wildfire through the general store, the church pews, the saloon's smoky corners. "She's cooking at Sutter's," Mabel Thorne hissed, her voice dripping venom as she weighed flour, her eyes narrow with judgment. A widow, out of mourning already, no respect for her dead husband. Living in his house, no ring, no shame. Mrs. Weller snapped, folding linens with a scowl, her hands moving faster as her voice rose, her eyes darting to Ellen's gray coat, no longer black, as if it were a crime. Ellen overheard, her heart twisting as she clutched her basket, the words cutting deeper than the cold, sharper than the knife in her pocket. Not because they lied, but because Hank's quiet care, his way of checking the stove before dawn, leaving extra wood by her door, standing close when the wind howled, his shoulder brushing hers, made her feel alive, and that felt like a betrayal of Finn's memory, a betrayal of the love she'd buried with him. She confronted Hank in the kitchen, flour dusting her hands, her voice tight with anger and fear, her eyes searching his face. "They're talking, saying I've forgotten my husband." He set down his coffee mug, his jaw clenching, his eyes narrowing as if he could see the town's judgment, feel its weight. "Then let's give them something real to choke on." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Not a ring, but a contract, its edges worn but precise, its words a shield. Marriage by law, to protect her name, her place at the ranch, her own room, her independence, no obligations unless she chose them. The world's cruel, Ellen, he said, his voice low and steady, like a promise carved in stone, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. This is armor. She stared at the paper, her throat tight, her mind racing with the weight of it, the implications, the choice. And you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her heart pounding. He shrugged, his eyes unreadable, a shadow passing over them like a cloud. I've lived with worse than gossip. But as he turned away, she saw his hand tremble, just for a moment, and wondered what weight he carried, what secrets he kept locked behind those eyes. The wedding was quiet, held in the ranch's parlor with only Reverend Whiteam and Lien Zhao as witness. Ellen wore gray, her hand steady but heart racing. Hank's eyes were warm but shadowed, as if carrying a hidden weight. They signed a paper, more than ink, a silent bond. At "You may kiss the bride," his gentle touch sent a shiver through her. That night, the certificate lay beside Finn's knife and a sprig of sage, pressed in a poetry book Hank had once left. Outside, snow fell, and in the trees, a figure watched, a glint of steel in the moonlight. She locked her door, knife beneath her pillow, haunted by the fear that the past wasn't finished with her. The ranch became her sanctuary, but the shadow grew bolder, its presence a constant hum beneath the daily rhythm, a threat that never slept. Ellen's cooking bound the men together. Stew for frigid nights, cornbread at dawn, pies that sparked rare laughter around the long table. Their warmth a defiance against the cold, a reminder of what they fought for. The hands called her Miss Ellen, their voices softening when she served them, their stories of cattle drives, bar fights, and lost loves filling the bunkhouse with life, with a sense of family she hadn't known she needed. She listened, her own grief easing in their company, their rough kindness a balm to her wounds. But the knife stayed close, a reminder of the world outside, of the danger that waited. Hank was her shadow, chopping wood, fixing the roof, always near but never crowding, his presence a comfort and a question, his silence both a shield and a wall. But the signs of trouble multiplied, each one a crack in the ranch's fragile peace. A calf was found dead, its throat cut, hoof prints leading to the hills, disappearing into the snow like a ghost trail. Hank's face darkened as he saddled his horse, his rifle slung across his back, his mouth a grim line, his eyes distant. "Stay sharp," he told her, his hand lingering on her arm, his touch warm through her sleeve, but his voice tight, as if he carried a burden he couldn't share. She nodded, the knife in her pocket a cold weight, its presence a constant reminder of the stakes. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice low, searching his face for answers, for truth. He hesitated, his eyes flickering with something like guilt or fear or both. "Trouble from the past, not just yours." His evasiveness stung, planting a seed of doubt that grew with every unanswered question, every glance he avoided. That night, she found a scrap of paper under her door. Not in Hank's hand, the words scrawled in jagged ink, "We know you're there." Her heart raced. The words a threat she couldn't unsee. Her fingers tracing the knife's edge as she stared into the dark. Her mind racing with questions she feared to ask. The days grew tense, danger thick in the air. A week later, Hank didn't return from the herd. Whispers of rustlers. Maybe the same men who'd burned her cabin, spread fast. Fear gripped Ellen as she imagined him dead in the snow. She grabbed a lantern and rode into the storm with Amos. They found Hank in a gully, wounded and barely conscious, his horse gone. Ellen bound his wound, her fear buried beneath determination. Back at the ranch, she fought to save him, cleaning, boiling water, staying by his side as the storm raged. "I lost Finn," she whispered. "I won't lose you." Hank stirred, gripped her hand, and rasped, "Not going anywhere." At dawn, he woke, weak but alive. "You came for me," he said, voice heavy with emotion. She nodded, tears falling. "Couldn't let you go." But in his eyes, a flicker of secrecy remained, a shadow she couldn't ignore. By the fire, as he regained strength, his shoulder bandaged but his spirit unbroken, he spoke of Catherine, his wife, lost to fever 5 winters ago, who'd cooked for strangers with a heart as warm as her hearth, her laughter a light he'd never replaced, her death a wound he'd carried in silence, a scar that shaped every choice he'd made. Ellen shared Finn's story, his fight with the gang over a debt, his body left in the snow, a death she blamed herself for, thinking she could have saved him if she'd been stronger, faster, braver, if she'd known the truth he'd hidden. Their griefs wove together, not as chains, but as threads in a shared tapestry, binding them closer, their pain a bridge between their broken hearts. But the danger wasn't gone, and the ranch felt like a battlefield waiting to erupt. A note was nailed to the bunkhouse door days later, the words scrawled in jagged ink, "Leave or burn again." Ellen's blood ran cold, her hands trembling as she read it, the threat sinking into her bones like frost. The gang knew she was here, and they weren't done, their hunger for vengeance a fire that wouldn't die. Hank burned the note, his eyes dark as coal, his face a mask of resolve, his hands steady but his voice tight. "They won't touch you," he said, his words a vow. But there was an edge to them, like he was hiding a truth that could unravel everything. She pressed him, her voice sharp, her fear turning to anger, her heart pounding. "What aren't you telling me?" He looked away, his jaw tight, his hands clenching into fists, his silence a wall she couldn't breach. "It's my burden, not yours." His secrecy cut deeper than the cold, and she wondered what he knew about the gang and about Finn. That night, she found a single bullet on her windowsill, gleaming in the moonlight, its presence a silent promise of violence, a warning that the gang was closer than she'd feared, their eyes on her every move. The ranch hands armed themselves, patrolling the fences with rifles, their faces grim, their laughter replaced by tense silence, their eyes darting to every shadow, every rustle in the trees. Ellen cooked, her knife never far, her eyes scanning the hills for movement, her heart heavy with the weight of waiting, of knowing the storm was coming. The tension grew, a taut wire ready to snap, the ranch a fortress under siege, its walls strong but its peace fragile. One evening, a hand named Amos, loyal but nervous, let slip a piece of Hank's past over a bottle of whiskey, his words slurred but heavy. Years ago, after Catherine's death, Hank had tracked the gang when they'd robbed his supply wagon. He'd cornered them, his brother, Jacob, a young man drawn to their promises of wealth. Among them, pleading for mercy, his eyes wide with fear. Hank let them go, unable to pull the trigger on his own blood, too broken by grief and betrayal to fight. Jacob died later, killed by the gang's leader for trying to leave, his death a wound that never healed. The gang knew Hank's shame, his weakness, and they used it to taunt him, to draw him out, to make him bleed. Ellen's doubt hardened. Had Hank's weakness, his past, drawn the gang to her, made her a target? But when she saw him mend a hand's broken arm, his hand steady, or leave Sage by her door, his quiet care a constant, her heart softened, her anger tempered by the man he was now. Still, the questions gnawed. What did he know about Finn's deal? And why wouldn't he tell her? She confronted him, her voice low but fierce, her heart torn between anger and pity, her eyes searching his. Your brother was one of them. Did you let them go because of him? Hank's face hardened, but his eyes were raw, glistening with unshed tears, his voice breaking. I let them go because I was weak, because I thought I could save him. He died anyway, and I've paid for it every day. Not anymore. His confession broke something in her, but it also built something new. Trust, fragile but real, a bridge over the chasm of their secrets, a hope that they could face the darkness together. The gang's shadow grew darker, their presence a poison seeping into every corner of the ranch, a venom that tainted the air. A horse was found dead, its saddle slashed, a warning carved into its flank. Time's up. A hand caught a stranger watching the ranch from a ridge, his face hidden by a scarf, but he vanished before they could catch him, leaving only a broken arrow in the snow, its fletching stained with blood. Ellen's sleep became a battle, her dreams a tangle of fire and blood. Finn's voice pleading for forgiveness, Hank's face blurring into his, their eyes begging her to run. She checked the knife daily, its handle worn from her grip, its blade her only constant, a tether to the woman she'd been and the one she was becoming. One morning, she found a child's glove nailed to the bunkhouse door, its fabric stained with blood, though no child lived on the ranch. The sight a twisted mockery of innocence. The hands grew restless, their patrols tighter, their eyes darting to every shadow, their hands never far from their rifles. Hank's rides grew longer, his face more drawn, his silences heavier, his shoulders bowed under a weight he wouldn't name. She caught him once, staring at a locket in his hand, his brother's initials carved into its surface, his fingers tracing the metal as if it could bring him back, his eyes distant with a pain she couldn't reach. "You can't change the past," she said, her voice soft but firm, her hand brushing his arm. He closed the locket, his eyes meeting hers, raw and open, his voice low. "But I can fight for the future." His words stirred something in her, a hope she hadn't dared to feel, but the glove burned in her mind, a reminder that the future was a fragile thing, a flame that could be snuffed out. The truth came in fragments, each one a shard of glass cutting deeper, drawing blood. Hank returned from town with a ledger, its pages yellowed and brittle, found hidden in the sheriff's attic, locked away for years, its existence a secret even the law had feared to touch. It was Finn's, listing debts to the gang, not for money, but for a map to a silver vein he'd discovered in the hills, a secret he'd guarded with his life, a treasure he'd refused to share. The gang had burned her home to force his widow's hand, believing she knew where it was, their rage of fire that wouldn't die. "Did you know?" Ellen asked, her voice trembling, the ledger heavy in her hands, its words a betrayal of the man she'd loved, a man she thought she'd known. Hank shook his head, his face raw with regret, his eyes haunted by the past. "Suspected. Finn came to me 2 years ago, asked for protection. Said he'd crossed dangerous men, men who'd kill for what he had. I turned him away. Thought he was trouble, a man chasing fool's gold." Her anger flared, hot and sharp, her voice breaking, her hands shaking with the weight of it. "You could have saved him." Hank met her eyes, unflinching, his voice steady but heavy with guilt, his shoulders sagging. "I know, and I've carried that every day since. But I won't turn you away." His words softened her rage, but the ledger burned in her hands. Finn's secret's a weight she hadn't asked to carry, a legacy of lies that haunted her still. That night, she found a letter slipped under her door, in Finn's hand, dated the day he died, its paper worn but intact. "Ellen, I hid the map to keep you safe. The silver was cursed, and I was a fool to chase it. I lied to protect you, but I never stopped loving you. Forgive me." Tears fell as she read, her guilt easing but her fear growing, the map a ghost that haunted her still, a shadow that refused to fade. She burned the letter, its ashes mingling with the fire, but the weight of its words lingered, a reminder that the past was never truly gone. Days later, another letter appeared, this one not from Finn but from his friend, a man named Silas, who'd ridden with him before the gang turned deadly. The leader, Scarred Jack, was Finn's partner once. He betrayed him, swore to take the silver for himself. Finn hid the map to stop him, but Jack will kill you to find it. Trust no one." The words hit like a bullet. The name scarred Jack, a key to the gang's hatred, a link to Finn's death, a truth that made her question everything. She showed it to Hank, her voice steady but her heart racing. "Did you know Jack?" His face paled, his eyes darkening, his hands clenching. "Knew of him. He was the one who killed Jacob. I didn't know he was tied to Finn." His voice was raw, but there was a hesitation, a flicker of doubt that made her wonder if he was telling the whole truth. The gang's attacks escalated, their patience worn thin, their hunger for the map a madness that drove them. A barn was torched, the flames caught before they spread, but the message was clear. They were coming, and they wouldn't stop. A hand went missing, his hat found bloodied by the river. A knife plunged through it like a warning, its blade glinting in the dawn. Ellen's dreams turned to nightmares. Fire, blood, Finn's face morphing into Hank's, their voices pleading for her to run, to fight, to live. She began to notice Hank's habits. The way he checked his rifle each night, the way he avoided certain trails, the way he'd pause when she mentioned Finn, as if weighing what to say, as if guarding a secret that could destroy them. One evening, Amos, drunk on whiskey and fear, let slip another piece. Scarred Jack had taunted Hank after Jacob's death, sending him a letter with his brother's bloodied ring, a promise to ruin him. Hank had burned the letter, but the gang knew his pain, his shame, and they used it to draw him out, to make him bleed. Ellen confronted Hank, her voice low but fierce, her heart torn between anger and pity, her eyes searching his for the truth. "Jack killed your brother. Did you know he was after Finn's map?" Hank's face hardened, but his eyes were raw, glistening with unshed tears, his voice breaking. "I didn't know until Silas's letter. Jack's a ghost from my past, Ellen. I thought I'd buried him." His confession broke something in her, but it also built something new. Trust, fragile but real, a bridge over the chasm of their secrets, a hope that they could face the darkness together. The gang's shadow grew darker, their presence a poison seeping into every corner of the ranch, a venom that tainted the air, the water, the very ground they walked on. A fence was cut, cattle scattered into the hills, their bellows echoing in the night. A hand found a trap in the snow, its jaws snapped shut inches from his leg, a message meant to terrify, to break their resolve. Ellen's sleep became a battle, her dreams a tangle of fire and blood, Finn's voice pleading for forgiveness, Hank's face blurring into his, their eyes begging her to run, to fight, to live. She checked the knife daily, its handle worn from her grip, its blade her only constant, a tether to the woman she'd been and the one she was becoming. One morning, she found a child's glove nailed to the bunkhouse door, its fabric stained with blood. Though no child lived on the ranch, the sight a twisted mockery of innocence, a threat that made her stomach churn. The hands grew restless, their patrols tighter, their eyes darting to every shadow, their hands never far from their rifles, their laughter silenced by fear. Hank's rides grew longer, his face more drawn, his silences heavier, his shoulders bowed under a weight he wouldn't name. She caught him once, staring at a locket in his hand, his brother's initials carved into its surface, his fingers tracing the metal as if it could bring him back, his eyes distant with a pain she couldn't reach. "You can't change the past," she said, her voice soft but firm, her hand brushing his arm, her touch a quiet plea. He closed the locket, his eyes meeting hers, raw and open, his voice low. "But I can fight for the future." His words stirred something in her, a hope she hadn't dared to feel, but the glove burned in her mind, a reminder that the future was a fragile thing, a flame that could be snuffed out in an instant. The final blow came on a moonless night, the valley shrouded in a darkness that felt alive, a void that swallowed sound and light. Ellen found the map, hidden in the handle of Finn's knife, its edges brittle with age, its lines a promise of wealth and death. a curse that had taken everything. She stared at it, the silver vein a siren's call, the cost of her home, her peace, her life. She burned it in the fire, the flames consuming the last of Finn's secrets. Her choice a defiance of the past, a declaration that she would not be its prisoner. Hours later, the gang struck, their torches lighting the valley like a hellish dawn, their shouts a war cry that shook the earth, their numbers greater than she'd feared. Hank and the hands were ready, rifles gleaming, traps set along the trails, their faces grim with resolve, their hearts steeled for battle. Ellen fired from the bunkhouse, her aim true, the leader's torch snuffed as he fell, his scream cut short by the snow, his body crumpling like a broken doll. Another charged her, his face the same debt collector from months ago, his eyes wild with rage, his knife gleaming in the firelight. "You burned it," he gasped, blood bubbling on his lips, his hand clutching a wound she'd dealt. "You'll die for nothing." She knelt, her pistol steady, her voice calm, her heart steady. "I'm living for something." He slumped, silent, his eyes empty, his threats snuffed out like a candle. The fight raged on, the night alive with gunfire, screams, and the acrid smell of smoke. The valley a battlefield where hope and fear collided. A hand fell, his blood staining the snow, his rifle clattering to the ground. His name, Josiah, whispered by the others in grief. Hank took a bullet to the shoulder, his face twisting in pain, but he fought on, his knife flashing in the firelight, his eyes burning with a fury that matched the flames. Ellen reloaded, her hands steady, her fear buried under a resolve that burned brighter than the torches, her heart pounding with a fierce need to protect what she'd found. The gang thinned, their numbers dwindling, but their leader, scarred Jack, his cheek marked by a jagged wound, his eyes cold as death, remained, his rifle trained on Ellen, his voice a venomous hiss that cut through the chaos. "You're his widow," he snarled, his lips curling with hatred. "You'll pay for his betrayal." Hank tackled him, the two men wrestling in the snow, fists and blood flying, their grunts echoing in the chaos, their struggle a mirror of the past they both carried. Ellen fired, grazing Jack's arm, giving Hank the edge, her shot a declaration of her place in this fight. Hank pinned him, his knife at his throat, his face a mask of fury, his voice raw with pain and resolve. "It's over," he growled, his hands steady despite the blood seeping from his shoulder. Jack laughed, a wet, broken sound, his eyes gleaming with malice, his voice a taunt. "You'll never outrun your brother's shadow, Sutter. He died screaming your name, begging for you to save him." Hank's hand shook, his knife pressing deeper, his face contorted with a pain that ran deeper than the bullet in his flesh. But Ellen stepped forward, her voice calm, cutting through the rage like a beacon. "He's not running anymore." Jack was bound, his wrists tied with rope, his defiance broken, his eyes dull with defeat. The sheriff, newly bold with the town's eyes watching, took him away, the gang's remnants scattering into the night, their power shattered, their threat reduced to whispers in the wind. In the silence after, the ranch was a battlefield, snow stained red, the air thick with smoke, the hands tending their wounds, their faces weary but alive, their voices soft as they mourned Josiah, as they honored the fight. Ellen turned to Hank, blood on her hands, her voice raw, her heart laid bare, her eyes searching his. "I love you." He cupped her face, his kiss deep, grounding, like the earth after a storm, his touch a promise that anchored her, a vow that they'd face whatever came next together. The world felt new, but one secret remained, a final thread to unravel, a truth that could heal or break them. Days later, Hank brought her a second letter, found in the gang's camp, its paper worn but intact, its words a bridge to the past. It was Finn's, written to her before his death. "Ellen, I hid the map to keep you safe. The silver was cursed, and I was a fool to chase it. I lied to protect you, but I never stopped loving you. Forgive me." Tears fell as she read, her guilt dissolving like snow in spring. Her love for Finn a memory she could carry without pain, a light that no longer burned. She looked at Hank, his face open, no more shadows, his shoulder bandaged, but his eyes clear, his hand brushing hers with a gentleness that spoke of love. "You kept fighting," he said, his voice soft, his eyes holding hers with a warmth that made her heart ache. "That's enough." The seasons turned, the valley softening under the thaw, the snow giving way to green, to life. Ellen gave birth to a daughter, Rose Catherine Sutter. Rose for hope, Catherine for memory, a name that held the past and the future in balance, a promise of new beginnings. They opened a kitchen at the ranch, a warm, bustling place serving stew, pies, and cornbread to travelers and townsfolk, its tables filled with laughter, its hearth a beacon in the wilderness, its walls alive with the hum of community. Ellen's cooking became a legend, her name a badge of pride, her laughter a song that echoed through the valley, drawing even the sternest hands to smile, to linger, to share stories of their own. The gang was gone, the map ash, Finn's secrets buried, Hank's past the scar that no longer bled, its pain softened by the life they'd built. She stood on the porch, Rose in her arms, Hank beside her, his hand warm on her shoulder, his presence a home she'd never expected to find, a love she'd never dared to dream of. "You were born from ashes," she whispered to her daughter, her voice soft but sure, her heart full, "but you're made of spring." The wind blew gentle, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of new beginnings. The valley alive with the hum of life reborn, its scars a testament to the strength that had carried them through. If this tale of fire, secrets, love, and redemption gripped you, like, share, and subscribe. More Wild West stories wait, forged from grit, heart, and the unbreakable will to rise from the ashes and build anew, to find light in the darkest of storms.